give you a little bit of an overview of what we've at Transparency International have been working on for the past 4 years and what has just been published on the 1st of February. Always start with the outcome. That's it. A handbook for preventing corruption in humanitarian assistance. And I will start with a little bit of a background, how we sort of came to work on it, how it went, what was sort of our research recommendations, how we work with partner agencies, and where we're taking this from here. Really, the idea to work on a handbook or toolbox came around the Asian tsunami, because back then we have very strong national chapters, like what we call our country offices in Indonesia and Sri Lanka. And these offices were really flooded by questions from big agencies, you know, what do we do? Indonesia, Sri Lanka, both countries where corruption is quite embedded. We have so many resources flowing in the country, like human resource and financial. And they were really looking for help, for some good practices, and thought we could provide it. Well, back then, there was nothing much we could say, apart from the more like general work we've been doing. We brought back then some donors together, the government, tried to get some key recommendations on the table, but really we did not have anything sort of practical to lay out. And we thought, okay, we have to change this. One of our first concerns back then was that we needed to understand what were the key corruption risks in an emergency relief operation compared to more long-term development. Because at Transparency International, we've been looking at long-term development since the past 15 years, since our foundation basically. But we had no clear idea where the corruption risk differed in emergency relief operations. So what we did back then, we partnered with the Humanitarian Policy Group of the Overseas Development Institute in London, and we commissioned them to do for us a corruption risk map. This corruption risk map was published in 2006, and it's really it's a generic risk map that looks at the entire relief cycle, all the way from need assessment down to monitoring evaluation, and we really try to come up with each possible corruption risk we can think of. Of course, a risk map that had to be adapted to a specific context. Not all risk would occur at one time, but it gave us an overview of the risk that could occur. Of course, we realized this is all great, but it has to be verified at the field level. We need to figure out, are these risks really valid? And then, of course, somehow back then our mind was that one day we want to have this risk map and we want to have all the risks, and on the other hand we want to have the good practices. You know, how can you tackle these risks? And not even talking about best practice, but good practice. You know, something we at Transparency International can live with, and something an agency is actually able to implement at the field level. That was sort of important for us. No sort of high-level things that look nice on the paper, but then simply can't be done at the field level. So what we did, we were very lucky. We partnered with 7 leading humanitarian NGOs, Islamic Relief, one of them, CARE, World Vision, Save the Children, Catholic Relief Service, Lutheran World Federation, over a period of 2 years. And we also got ourselves technical assistant on board by a group of research consultants from the Feinstein International Center at Tufts University, and again of the Overseas Development Institute, because we do realize at Transparency International where our limits are. We know about corruption, we know about good governance, transparency, accountability. We had no clue about humanitarian assistance. So we thought, okay, if we want to come up with something credible here, we need to get into a partnership. And anyway, we're very much into coalition building at TI. So we thought, okay, let's partner, let's match our expertise with the expertise of the sector and do something with the sector for the sector. This is sort of what we had in mind. I mean, it sounds easy. It wasn't really easy back then. We did a year of sort of dog and pony show, as we call it, really going around to the main meetings where all the main humanitarian NGOs were, did a lot of presentations, followed up with the agencies afterwards, came for personal visits. You know, I had lovely times with Islamic Relief and all the other ones, really convincing people we want to partner with them. We don't want to go in to investigate, but we want to look at the good works they've been doing already, some of the key challenges they face, and then create something for the community out of this. So over a year and a half, we did staff interviews at headquarters and field offices. Each agency selected a field office. For example, with Islamic Relief, we went to Pakistan. With World Vision, we went to Kenya. We went to Bandar Aceh. We went to Lebanon. So we really had quite a number of field exposure. We talked to hundreds and hundreds of people, everybody from the executive director down to the driver, because we really wanted to get an idea what are the risks people face, and most importantly, how do they tackle it. We published this research work in a report in 2008, and it was a sort of a final research report. And we also complemented that by 2 case studies, because what we did not do in the research report, we did not reflect the beneficiary perception of corruption. We only reflect like staff perception. So we complemented that by 2 case studies. Of course, we have loved to do more, but as usual, money was a little bit of a problem there. So we did 2 at least. And this research report really formed the evidence base for the handbook that back then was still this sort of idea, dream we had in our minds. So I want to give you a bit of a run through to some of the key recommendations that came out of the research reports, and then also, of course, are reflected in the handbook. A big area is to integrate a corruption risk analysis into emergency preparedness. That was sort of one of the main recommendations we came up with, because we really felt like all the agencies that do plan for the emergencies, of course not all the ones like Haiti and tsunamis are to anticipate, but most of them know where there will be again, responding to floods in India, Bangladesh next year. So you can take a corruption risk analysis into account when you do plan for these scenarios. Address corruption risk and mitigation measures in staff training programs. What we always try to do is that you don't have to do like corruption specific risk training. All of the agencies do already training in various scenarios, be it job specific or for your emergency response teams. So do integrate some of the preventive mechanisms, in these trainings. Ensure separation of duties and careful vetting and selection of staff, partners and suppliers. With all the people we talked to, everybody always said this is one of the main problems they face, if duties are not separated. If you have only one person, for example, controlling a procurement problem, you always run into problems on one point. And really see when you select staff, partners and suppliers, this is a very tricky thing in an emergency. And often you have to respond quickly. You might not really have the chance to carefully do background checks on your staffs. However, then if you can't do it at that moment, which we know you possibly can, then once the situation calms down, try to do it. Have a look at the people you actually hire. On-site monitoring is always something we, monitoring. That's sort of also one of the key issues that came out of our research, because it's just essential to detect corruption. Of course, we realize this is also a money question, and you need to have the human and financial resources to actually do the monitoring, but we feel that's really one of the crucial points, and that, you have to be there, you have to check, not only are the houses there, but also where they're built to the standard you want to, so you can't just give the money and then one day turn up and yes, the house is there and it's all great, but what sort of happened along the process. And we found that's often one of the key problems. They provide greater transparency to beneficiaries and affected governments and local CSO comes also a bit back to the monitoring, because we feel people need to know what they're entitled to in order to respond. So you need to enable people to actually understand what they should be getting. This leads back to the next one: increase downward accountability. which also requires to provide compliant mechanisms for staff and beneficiaries. So, you know, if people do know what they're entitled to, is there also a way where they can voice if they, you know, if they do not get what they should be getting, or if there are other problems. And I know compliant mechanisms, it is a huge issue for a lot of agencies, and a lot of agencies deal with it. It's very difficult to implement, often at the field level. But there are a number of agencies that do quite good work on that already. The final one is something that we also felt really strongly about, like break the taboo about corruption risks and share information among donors, affected country governments and aid providers. Unfortunately, there is still a taboo. We really seen a change over the past 4 years, but a lot of agencies still feel very insecure, particularly when it comes to communicate about corruption risk outside the agencies. And we do understand it, because we do also try to lobby the donors on the other hand, and the governments, because they can create an environment where people feel secure to talk about these issues and bring them up without being penalized afterwards. But it does remain a problem. We came across a lot of dilemmas or trade-offs, how we call them. Unfortunately, there's no magic formula. We wish we would have found one, but we didn't in the past 4 years. But there's always sort of things agencies told us they feel they have to balance, and they find that balance is very, very difficult. One of the first ones is reputational risk versus open discussion. So when do you know, how can you actually create an open discussion about corruption, but how can you not run into risking the reputation of your agencies, you know, if cases come to the outside? People feel this was always one of the issues people felt they felt it was really difficult, you know, because how do you don't run in a risk if the media picks up the things from a wrong angle, and it is a tricky situation. Too many versus too few controls. So some people told us, gosh, sometimes you just have so many controls in place, you can't really do your work. But if you have too little, things might get out of hand. So how do you strike the balance with that? There's an urgency need for speed, very prudence. So you have to, you know, you get into these countries very quickly. You have to, react within like 24 hours. And how do you actually still be able to make the right decisions? The next one goes really hand in hand in that, like, local empowerment versus standardized systems. So really, how do you work with, a lot of you guys work with partner agencies in the field. How do you convert your policies down to the people you work with? How do you make them a partner and don't do constant monitoring, but yet how do you ensure that the money is getting there where it should be? A lot of agencies told us they feel it's difficult to monitor a partner, because that's not the sense of a partnership, you know. So, so what do we really try to do in this handbook toolbox? I usually never really we had a bit of a problem with the word handbook, because I know people sometimes run out of the room and think, my gosh, we already have like 50 handbooks for every possible topic, and here we have another one. So what we're trying to do is really to provide a menu of good practice tools, meaning we're not looking at best practice. Not everything needs to be perfect, but what can we do to get a little bit better? And the word tool really reflects that we want to do something very practical here. We don't want to. This is not standards. This is really something that should be easily be implemented at the field levels. So we want to help agencies to prevent, detect, and mitigate corruption risks. That's what we sort of had in mind. At Transparency International, we always have to make sure we put our corruption lens on. You know, constantly while we were writing this handbook, we had to remind ourselves we don't need to tell them how they should do a procurement process or how they should write a code of conduct, but we need to tell them, you know, where are the key risks and how can they use the policies and guidelines they have in place already to tackle corruption. We suggest a number of best practices for overall institutional-wide anti-corruption policies, and then we have specific preventive policies and procedures. We look at ways to detect corrupt practices and then how do you deal it when you encounter it. When you will look at the handbook, it's also available online. You see it has 3 sections. The first one looks at institutional policies and practices. So this is all sorts of policies most agencies have in place or should have in place. Everything from a code of conduct to policies on sexual exploitation and abuse to HR policies, etc. And we don't tell you how you should write them, but how can you use them to tackle corruption. And then in the second and third section of the handbook, we look at program functions and program support functions. So in the support functions, we look at the greatest procurement risks, the greatest finance risks, the greatest HR risks, supply chain management, etc. And in the program implementation, everything from need assessments to beneficiary selection to distribution to monitoring evaluation. Always with sort of our corruption risk lens on, seeing where's the corruption risk here. This is some of the implementing mechanisms you can use. This is some of the challenges you might face and things you will need to actually do it, and then give a set of sort of good references. The tools are all no longer than 2 pages. That was something that gave us sleepless nights. I know if you look at the handbook, you don't think it is, because it actually is quite big. There was a vision a few years ago to make this a pocket guide. I have to admit we failed slightly. It's 160 pages. It doesn't really fit in any pocket. But we felt strongly that we need this to start off with. There might be an idea to make this something smaller afterwards. We thought we have to demonstrate this is not an easy fix. But on the other hand, we wrote it in a manner you don't have to read it from the beginning to the end. If you're interested in finance or distribution or in some of the policies, you can easily jump to the section that's interested and only read that one. And then it gives guidance on what other tools might also be useful to you. So we try to sort of keep it as easy as possible in that way. So our target audience is quite broad, you can argue. Non-governmental organizations, senior organizational managers and policymakers, and of course operational field staff. So we always felt we really try to get the buy-in from the top, but also you need to get the buy-in from the people that actually, do the groundwork in the field. Donors, as mentioned, also very important for us. And we also, along the process, really linked up with other humanitarian stakeholders, as for instance, the quality and accountability initiatives. There's the Humanitarian Accountability Partnership, there are the sphere standards, there's People in Aid. There's really a number of people that's been thinking about similar issues for much longer. So instead of reinventing the wheel, we try to partner with them really early on to see, how can we complement each other, how can we bring their work in here. So if you look at the format, it's very much organized based on the corruption risk map we did initially in 2006. The tools are highly operational and hands-on. As mentioned, each of them can stand on their own. You can sort of, since it's a ring folder, you can sort of easily take out the ones that are of interest to you or distribute the other ones around sort of the organizations. Hence, there's also a lot of overlap. I mean, I had some peer reviewers who actually read the whole thing, which I did not expect, and came back to me and said, well, this is slightly repetitive, is it? I was like, yes, okay. I didn't really imagine somebody would read the whole book, because it's really written in a way that you don't have to do this. We try to keep it very user-friendly and in an easy language, easy access to relevant risk and remedies. So if you look at the tools, it's a lot of 3-4 key headings, main bullets, so you can really easily see where are the relevant risks. We have additional readings and references, and there is a CD-ROM version at the back of the handbook, and the online version is also on our website, easily to download. Most importantly, this is a living document. Just because it's published doesn't mean like that's it and we know it all. We want to really encourage to get feedback from people on the tools suggested, on the preventative mechanisms, on the references, because we really look at it, how can we constantly update this. We talked a lot with our partner agencies about a potential usage of the of the handbook. This is sort of some of the feedback we got back, because we tried to figure out how can people use it. The first one, integrate into existing agency policies and guidelines, was something we always hoped for, because we know, I very often hear from people, we are really initiative overloaded. And I tried to sneak around and said, okay, yes, this is another initiative, but, you know, of course this time it's all different. So we're looking at how can we make it as easily as possible fit into what you do already. So for example, some of our agencies told us already they, you know, when they update their policies and guidelines, they include the relevant parts. For example, their code of conduct, the sexual exploitation and abuse guidelines, into the emergency preparedness. So you don't have to do another code on corruption, but you can include it in what you have already. Agency training programs, this is a very important area for us. We don't want to do another new training on this. We want to look at what you do already on training and how can we incorporate what we provide you with in the training you do already. So we have everything from induction, briefings, to sector-specific jobs, and also if you work with partners. And then, of course, if you're already a member of some of the ongoing accountability initiatives, you know, if you implement HAP or SWIA in the field, we want to see how can we combine that with some of our work, and we very closely collaborate with them. So, the handbook, it's not an end, it's a sort of beginning, with a bit of breathing, hopefully, in between now. We're looking at the next phase, and of course advocacy, you know, adopting the handbook to the use by other humanitarian providers it's a very important element. And the second one is that we are always thinking about a companion monitoring toolkit for civil society. And we are at the moment looking at doing a potential pilot phase in post-earthquake Haiti. We have an office there, which is lucky. And we've talked to quite a number of donors already, not so much about money, so that would also be nice to get at one point, but more to get them on board, you know, with the key ones, with USAID, with the World Bank, with the Inter-American Bank, with ECHO, with CEDAR, etc. Because we realized you need to get them on board to partner with us, because back to the transparency issue, if they don't give us the information, there's not much to monitor. So that's where we're heading at the moment.